She texted, "You're not enough for me anymore." I replied, "Fair." The message came through while I was 40 feet up inspecting stress fractures on the Millbrook Bridge, my safety harness the only thing between me and the rocky creek below. 4 years together, 2 years sharing that rental house in Glastonbury, and Paige chose to end it with a text that continued for 3 more paragraphs about how I lacked the ambition and lifestyle she craved. I climbed down from the inspection platform, sat in my truck, and typed back a single word, "Fair." Then I screenshot everything and started thinking like the structural engineer I am, calculating load limits, identifying weak points, planning the controlled demolition of what I'd mistakenly thought was a solid foundation. She'd mentioned someone from her aerial yoga certification program, a guy named Ethan who understood her vision for abundance, and I realized I'd been financing her spiritual journey while she'd been shopping for my replacement. The certification had cost me $6,500, supposedly an investment in our future, though now I understood she meant her future, singular. For 11 months, I'd covered her $1,200 share of our $2,400 monthly rent while her meal prep delivery venture, Nourish and Flourish, complete with Instagram-worthy mason jar salads, hemorrhaged money faster than she could blame Mercury being in retrograde. The utilities, her $180 monthly unlimited yoga membership, 3 streaming services she needed for market research, all on my credit cards while she promised this was just temporary, just until her business found its footing. I pulled up my banking app right there in the truck, scrolling through months of transactions that told the real story, transfers to her account, payment confirmations for her car insurance, that $800 Reiki healing workshop she absolutely had to attend. The math was simple and brutal. I'd invested roughly $24,000 in someone who just informed me via text that I wasn't enough. But here's what Paige didn't know about month-to-month rental agreements, especially ones where only one person's name appears on every single rent check Mrs. Chen had cashed for the past 2 years. She didn't know I'd already been researching apartments closer to my sister's place in Hartford, tired of the hour-long commute just to maintain Paige's perfect suburban aesthetic. She definitely didn't know that her cryptocurrency investor, this Ethan she'd been secretly seeing, was about to discover exactly what kind of financial burden he'd been flirting with online. I made 3 phone calls from that bridge inspection site. First to Mrs. Chen, scheduling a meeting about the lease termination process. Second to my buddy Marcus who owned a moving company and owed me a favor from when I'd helped him with structural assessments for his warehouse. Third to my sister Rebecca, letting her know I'd be needing that guest room sooner than expected. By the time I got home that evening, Paige had rearranged the living room furniture, our furniture, bought entirely with my money, into what she called a prosperity corner for her newest venture, something involving essential oils and targeted social media advertising. She barely looked up when I walked in, too busy filming herself arranging bottles for her 17 Instagram followers. "Did you get my text?" she asked, adjusting a ring light I'd bought her for her birthday. "I did," I said, setting down my inspection equipment. "When are you planning to move?" She actually laughed, this little dismissive sound that would have hurt if I hadn't already started thinking of her as a structural liability rather than a partner. "Jake, I'm not moving anywhere. This is my home, my business headquarters. Ethan understands that I need stability to manifest my goals." The assumption that I'd continue paying for her to pursue another man was so breathtaking I actually had to sit down. "The lease is month to month," I reminded her. "I'm giving notice next week." The way her face changed, watching her realize that her carefully planned transition might not be so smooth, was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in months. 2 days later, while I was documenting foundation issues at a warehouse in Bridgeport, Marcus texted me something interesting. Screenshots from a local Facebook group where someone named Bethany Morse was warning women about her husband Ethan, who'd been conducting emotional affairs with multiple women online, promising them cryptocurrency investments and downtown loft living while actually being unemployed and living in Bethany's deceased father's house. The profile picture matched the guy Paige had been messaging constantly, the one whose LinkedIn claimed he was a blockchain consultant and wealth coach. I didn't send Paige the screenshots. I figured she'd discover Ethan's reality soon enough, probably right around the time she realized I was serious about the lease termination. Sometimes the best response to someone telling you you're not enough is to show them, through actions rather than words, that they were absolutely right. I wasn't enough of a fool to keep subsidizing their delusions. Mrs. Chen met me at her office above the Korean grocery store she owned, pouring me tea while I explained the situation with the clinical detachment I'd use for a structural failure report. "So Paige has been paying nothing for almost a year?" she asked, reviewing the rent records I'd brought. "300 when she could," I corrected, though we both knew that meant 300 maybe every third month, always with a story about delayed client payments or unexpected business expenses. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly, the same way she had when I'd first rented the place, seeing through pretense with the wisdom of someone who'd been a landlord for 30 years. "The lease requires 30 days notice for termination," she said. "I can have new tenants by next month, young couple, both doctors at Hartford Hospital, very eager." I thanked her and headed home to find Paige in full crisis mode, her phone pressed against her ear while she paced our living room. My living room, technically, since I'd paid for every square foot of it. "Ethan, please just call me back," she was saying to his voicemail. "I don't understand what Bethany told you, but she's clearly toxic and controlling." When she saw me, she ended the call and tried to shift into damage control mode. "Jake, we need to talk about this lease situation. You're being really impulsive." I set down my work bag and started organizing my drafting equipment, the expensive digital tools she'd once called boring boy toys, while asking me to buy her a $2,000 heat press for making custom yoga mats she never actually produced. "Nothing impulsive about it," I said. "I'm taking a position in New Haven, better pay, shorter commute." The lie came easily because it wasn't entirely false. I had been contacted about positions there, just hadn't pursued them while trying to make things work with Paige. Her face went through several expressions: disbelief, calculation, then panic as she realized her backup plan had ghosted her and her primary funding source was packing up. "You can't just abandon me like this," she said, voice rising. "What about everything we built together?" I looked around the room at the furniture I'd bought, the art I'd selected and paid for, the life I'd constructed while she'd contributed mood boards and manifestation journals. "What exactly did we build together, Paige?" She started crying then, but not the genuine tears of heartbreak. These were strategic tears, the kind she'd perfected when her meal prep business needed another cash infusion or when she'd maxed out her credit cards on inventory she never sold. "Mrs. Chen won't let me stay without proof of income," she sobbed. "My credit is complicated right now because of business investments." Complicated was certainly one word for a 510 credit score and $18,000 in defaulted credit card debt, details she'd hidden but I'd discovered when she'd asked me to co-sign for a small business loan 6 months ago. I'd declined, citing my own financial goals, and she'd accused me of not believing in her dreams. Now those dreams were about to collide with reality at full speed. She tried everything over the next few days: sudden affection, cooking elaborate dinners with groceries I'd paid for, even suggesting couples therapy with a spiritual counselor she knew who charged $300 per session. Meanwhile, she was documenting everything on social media, crafting a narrative about financial coercion and narcissistic abandonment, with carefully curated photos that cropped out all the price tags from her designer purchases. But our mutual friends weren't buying it. Marcus's wife Janet called me after seeing Paige's posts, laughing about the woman who'd shown up to her baby shower with a $15 gift while wearing $400 shoes, complaining about financial abuse. The real entertainment came when Paige tried to negotiate directly with Mrs. Chen, arriving at the landlord's office in her best manifestation of success outfit, the kind of athleisure that screamed money while actually screaming maxed out credit cards. Mrs. Chen called me afterward, barely containing her amusement. She offered to pay rent in yoga classes and nutritional counseling, Mrs. Chen said. When I asked for bank statements, she said traditional finance doesn't reflect her true abundance. The Facebook posts about Ethan kept surfacing. Apparently, Bethany Morse had receipts for everything, including screenshots of him promising the same downtown loft to 4 different women, none of whom knew about the others until Bethany created a group chat that turned into a support group. Paige's name appeared in one screenshot, listed as Yoga Girl number 3 in Ethan's phone, which probably stung more than discovering he was married. She made one last desperate play, showing up at my office with a handwritten letter about our soul connection and how the universe was testing us. But Sandra at reception, who'd heard enough about Paige over the years, told her I was in a meeting and would be all day, every day, indefinitely. Moving day arrived with the kind of precise coordination I usually reserved for construction projects, and watching Paige's face as the professional movers arrived at 8 a.m. sharp was worth every penny of the premium I'd paid for the early time slot. Marcus had sent his best crew, guys who worked with the efficiency of people who knew they were getting tipped well, and they started with the living room while Paige stood in her silk pajamas, the ones I'd bought her for Christmas, looking like someone watching their house burn down in slow motion. "You can't take the couch," she said, voice cracking as two guys lifted my $4,000 sectional. "We picked it out together." I pulled up the receipt on my phone, my name, my credit card, the zero contribution from her side of the relationship. "You picked it out, I paid for it." "There's a difference." The king bed frame came next, the one I'd built myself over a weekend while she'd hosted a vision board party for her failed business, using my tools, my expertise, my sweat while she'd contributed Instagram stories about manifesting masculine energy in her space. She tried blocking the doorway when they got to the kitchen, watching her Vitamix and espresso machine disappear into boxes. "Jake, please at least leave the basics. How am I supposed to live here?" The answer was simple. She wasn't supposed to live here at all after today, but I just directed the movers to keep working while I documented everything with photos, partly for insurance, mostly for evidence if she tried claiming I'd stolen our belongings. The real shock came when her aerial yoga instructor, Skylar, pulled up in a rented U-Haul, apparently under the impression she was moving in as Paige's new roommate. Paige said the rent was $800 total, Skylar said, looking confused as I laughed. $2,400, I corrected. "And that's if Mrs. Chen approves your application, which requires proof of income, first and last month's deposit, plus security." Skylar's face went pale, and she turned to Paige with the expression of someone realizing they'd been sold a timeshare in a swamp. "You said Jake was moving out because the rent was too expensive for him," Skylar said slowly. "You said we'd be saving money." I left them to sort that out while supervising the movers, but I could hear Paige's increasingly desperate explanations about how the universe would provide, how abundance was a mindset, how Skylar was thinking too small. By the time Skylar peeled out in the U-Haul, leaving skid marks on the driveway, Paige had moved from denial to rage. That's when things got destructive, literally. While I was outside checking inventory with the movers, Paige had what I can only describe as a spiritual tantrum, hurling her collection of crystals around the house, the ones she claimed channeled positive energy but apparently channeled property damage just fine. The rose quartz she'd insisted brought love into our space went straight through the decorative stained glass window in the sunroom, sending colored fragments across the floor I'd refinished myself. The meditation singing bowl she used every morning at 5 a.m. became a weapon against the hardwood floors, leaving deep gouges as she dragged it from room to room, trying to mark her territory like an unhinged cat. Mrs. Chen arrived for the final walkthrough just as Paige was attempting to pry the built-in bathroom shelving off the wall, claiming I'd installed it, for us, and therefore it was half hers. "What happened to my window?" Mrs. Chen asked, her calm tone somehow more terrifying than yelling would have been. "And these floors?" Paige tried to spin it as accidents during the emotional stress of moving, but Mrs. Chen had already pulled out her phone, documenting everything while calculating damages with the speed of someone who'd dealt with difficult tenants before. "This is at least $3,000 in repairs," Mrs. Chen announced. "Plus the security deposit, that's $4,200 you'll need to pay before I can provide any rental references." The meltdown that followed was spectacular enough that Mrs. Chen's grandson, who'd come to help with measurements, started recording for what he called evidence purposes, but was definitely going on his TikTok later. Paige called her father on speaker, sobbing about being homeless, about her toxic ex-boyfriend abandoning her, about how unfair life was to entrepreneurs with vision. Her father's response cut through her performance with surgical precision. "Paige, this is the third time in 5 years you've had a relationship crisis that requires bail money. Your mother and I discussed this. If you need help, you come home to Vermont. Otherwise, you're on your own." The way she screamed, "I'm not going back to Vermont," Told me everything about why she'd been so desperate to maintain the lifestyle I'd been funding. Going home meant admitting failure to the high school classmates she'd been trying to impress with her curated social media life. The ones who thought she was living her best life as a successful wellness entrepreneur instead of a kept woman with delusions of influence. As my loaded truck pulled away, I saw her sitting on the front steps surrounded by her essential oil inventory, her yoga mats, her manifestation journals, and the broken pieces of whatever fantasy she'd been living where someone else would always pay for her dreams while she contributed energy and intentions to the universe that apparently had just sent her an eviction notice in return. My new apartment in Hartford was smaller but entirely mine, a one-bedroom where every piece of furniture had a purpose and every dollar spent made sense, the kind of place where I could finally breathe without calculating the cost of someone else's chaos. I was 3 weeks into my new routine. Work, gym, dinner with Rebecca's family twice a week, when Paige's campaign started with the subtlety of a wrecking ball at my company's annual charity fundraiser for children's hospital construction projects. I was explaining load-bearing calculations to a potential client when I noticed the cluster of women near the entrance, all wearing matching yoga pants and determined expressions like a wellness cult on a mission. Paige had sent her aerial yoga squad as emotional support missiles, and they descended on me with the synchronized precision of people who'd rehearsed their talking points in a group chat. "Jake, you need to do the right thing," Skylar said, the same instructor who'd fled with the U-Haul 3 weeks ago. "Paige is struggling, and you just abandoned her after everything she gave you." I looked at these women, all perfectly contoured and holding green juices that cost more than my lunch, and wondered what exactly they thought Paige had given me besides debt and deadlines for her next business failure. "She gave me the opportunity to fund her lifestyle while she looked for my replacement," I said. "I'm grateful for the learning experience." That's when my colleague Brad interrupted, his face lighting up with recognition. "Wait, is that the MLM girl from TikTok?" He pulled out his phone, showing us a video titled, "Wellness Scammer Exposed: How She Targeted Elderly Women," with Paige's face clearly visible in the thumbnail, apparently from 6 months ago when she'd been pushing supplements I'd never known about. "She convinced my grandmother to spend $800 on immunity powder that turned out to be basically Tang with vitamins," Brad continued. "Grandma saw this expose and got her money back through her credit card company." The yoga squad scattered like roaches when the light comes on, suddenly remembering urgent appointments and divine timing that called them elsewhere. But Paige wasn't done with her guerrilla warfare. 2 days later, my mother called from her quilting guild meeting in tears because Paige had shown up claiming I'd emotionally abused her, financially controlled her, and destroyed her business dreams. "She made quite a scene," my mother said after she'd calmed down. But then Margaret Hoffman stood up and said she remembered Paige from the farmer's market, selling those meal prep containers for $30 each that gave everyone food poisoning. The entire guild essentially formed a protective circle and escorted her out. Dorothy Chin even threatened to call her son at the police department. The fact that a group of women in their 70s had better threat assessment than I'd had for 4 years wasn't lost on me, but things escalated when Paige posted my work address online with a call to action for her followers to report me for financial abuse and narcissistic manipulation to my employer. The calls started Monday morning. HR fielded 17 complaints in 3 hours, all using identical language that screamed copy-paste activism, but Paige had made a critical error by claiming I'd stolen money from our joint business ventures. My company took fraud accusations seriously enough to investigate, which meant pulling financial records that showed not only had I never taken money from Paige, but I'd been hemorrhaging cash into her various schemes like a broken ATM. HR actually offered me additional security resources and suggested I consider a restraining order, especially after Brad provided the TikTok video showing Paige's history of scamming. The investigation file they created would become useful later, though I didn't know it yet. The real shock came when Rebecca discovered the credit card situation entirely by accident, trying to help me consolidate my finances after the move. "Jake, why do you have a Nordstrom card with a $3,200 balance?" she asked, looking at my credit report. "I've never shopped at Nordstrom in my life," I said, and we both knew immediately what had happened. The security footage from Nordstrom was damning. Paige using a card in my name, signing receipts with my forged signature, buying designer clothes she'd worn on dates with other men while I was working overtime to cover our expenses. The fraud department was very interested in the timeline, especially since several purchases happened on days when I could prove I was in different cities for bridge inspections. "We see this more than you'd think," the investigator said. "Partner fraud is actually one of the most common types. Will you be pressing charges?" Rebecca answered before I could. "Yes, he will be. And we want copies of everything for our attorney." The look on my sister's face reminded me why structural engineers calculate safety factors. Sometimes you need backup support when the main beam is compromised, and Rebecca had appointed herself my personal reinforcement, arriving with spreadsheets, legal recommendations, and the kind of protective fury that made me grateful she was on my side. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday morning via process server at my office. 23 pages of legal fiction that read like Page had hired a creative writing major instead of a real attorney, claiming palimony despite Connecticut not recognizing such claims, demanding $32,000 for intentional infliction of emotional distress and constructive abandonment after years of induced financial dependence. Mr. Goldstein, the attorney Rebecca had researched with the thoroughness she usually reserved for her tax audits, read through it while occasionally chuckling. "She's claiming you promised marriage and financial security," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Did you ever propose?" "I once said we should look at rings together someday," I admitted. 3 years ago, before I knew she was allergic to contributing to anything besides her Instagram engagement rate. Goldstein made notes while explaining that Paige's father had apparently given her $5,000 to hire an attorney after she'd threatened suicide during a family intervention about her life choices, classic manipulation that had worked since high school according to what Rebecca had learned from mutual acquaintances. "The good news," Goldstein said, "is that her lawyer seems inexperienced. He's a personal injury attorney who usually handles slip-and-fall cases, not relationship disputes. The bad news is they're hoping you'll settle to avoid embarrassment." The embarrassment turned out to be entirely Paige's when her attorney accidentally submitted unredacted financial records during discovery, revealing not just the $15,000 inheritance from her grandmother 6 months ago that she'd never mentioned, but itemized spending that included $4,000 on cosmetic injections, $3,500 for a Tulum trip with someone named Ricardo, and $7,500 on what was categorized as wellness investments, but turned out to be a failed attempt to become a brand ambassador for a luxury activewear company that had rejected her for having fake followers. "This is helpful," Goldstein said with the satisfaction of someone who'd just been handed a winning lottery ticket. She received substantial funds while claiming financial dependence. The Tulum trip dates coincide with when she was supposedly building her meal prep business. And these cosmetic procedures happened while she was telling you she couldn't afford rent. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in Hartford Superior Court, and Paige showed up dressed like she was auditioning for a reality show about wronged women, complete with a black dress that screamed, "Grieving widow," despite no one having died except her credibility. Her attorney, Mr. Brennan, seemed to realize his mistake when Judge Harrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, began by reading Paige's original breakup text aloud in a monotone voice that made the words sound even more ridiculous. "You're not enough for me anymore. I need someone who understands my vision for abundance. Ethan from my certification program appreciates my entrepreneur spirit in ways you never could," Judge Harrison read, then looked up over her glasses. "Ms. Winters, you initiated this separation, correct?" Paige tried to explain that the text was taken out of context, that I had emotionally manipulated her into sending it, which made even her own attorney shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Your Honor," Brennan attempted, "my client was in a vulnerable position, induced to give up her lucrative career for the promise of domestic security." Goldstein stood up with the precision of someone about to demolish a poorly constructed argument. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that Ms. Winters' lucrative career consisted of 8 months working part-time at a juice bar 4 years ago, earning approximately $11,000 annually before taxes. Since then, she's operated multiple failed businesses, all funded entirely by my client, including a meal prep service that resulted in 3 health department complaints. The judge reviewed the financial records while Page's attorney tried to pivot. The emotional distress my client suffered, he began, but Judge Harrison cut him off. Counsel, your client spent $15,000 of inherited money on cosmetic procedures and international travel while claiming financial hardship. She used Mr. Thompson's identity to fraudulently obtain credit, which is currently under criminal investigation. She initiated a harassment campaign against his elderly mother and attempted to damage his professional reputation with false accusations. What emotional distress are we discussing exactly? The courtroom was silent except for the court reporters typing and what sounded suspiciously like Page hyperventilating into a designer handbag. Goldstein then presented the evidence of property damage to Mrs. Chen's rental house, the social media harassment with printed screenshots of every post calling me an abuser while she posted photos from Tulum, and testimonies from 3 of Page's former business partners describing similar patterns of financial exploitation. Your Honor, Goldstein continued, we're counterfiling for defamation, fraud, and harassment. We're seeking $4,800 in legal fees plus damages for the identified theft and criminal harassment. Judge Harrison's decision was swift and brutal. Ms. Winters, your claim is dismissed with prejudice. You will pay Mr. Thompson's legal fees within 30 days. I'm also recommending this case to the state's attorney for potential fraud charges. Mr. Brennan, I suggest you better screen your clients in the future. This borders on frivolous litigation, and any future attempts at legal harassment will result in sanctions. Court is adjourned. The sound of her gavel was the perfect punctuation to Page's gasping sob, but the best part was when she turned to her attorney and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, you said this would be easy money, that men always settle these cases, which Brennan desperately tried to shush while gathering his papers like a man fleeing a crime scene. The humiliation of losing in court sent Page into what I can only describe as a psychotic break disguised as a wellness journey, starting with the creation of a fake Instagram account under my sister Rebecca's name, complete with stolen family photos and fabricated posts about my non-existent history of domestic violence. The account posted elaborate stories about my imaginary ex-wife who'd fled the state, restraining orders from fictional women, and claims I'd been fired from previous jobs for harassment. Impressive fiction considering I'd never been married and had worked at the same firm since graduation. Rebecca discovered it when her actual friend called asking why she was publicly destroying her own brother online, and the technical incompetence of Page's plan became clear when the IP address was traced directly to her phone, the same one still registered under the family plan her father paid for. My employer received 47 emails in 2 days demanding my termination, all originating from various Gmail accounts but using identical phrases about protecting women in the workplace and accountability for abusers, which IT traced back to 3 IP addresses, Page's phone, her laptop, and interestingly, the public Wi-Fi at the coffee shop where she'd been working since the court case. Their investigation cleared me completely, but the company's legal team was now very interested in pursuing cyberstalking charges, especially after discovering she'd also left reviews on professional sites claiming I'd embezzled funds and built unsafe structures, accusations that could have destroyed my engineering license if anyone had taken them seriously. The real escalation came through Brittany, a 22-year-old waitress at Page's new job who Page had befriended with the kind of intensive love bombing that should have been a warning sign. Page convinced Brittany that I'd stolen her grandmother's inheritance, destroyed her business, and left her homeless, showing carefully edited bank statements that removed all the deposits I'd made but kept her withdrawals visible. She promised Brittany $500 to send a message by spray painting my car, giving her my schedule, my parking spot number, and even providing the spray paint, which she'd apparently stolen from a hardware store based on the security footage police later obtained. The parking garage cameras captured everything in high definition, Brittany arriving in Page's borrowed car, spending 12 minutes spray painting "deadbeat" across my hood while looking around nervously, and then calling someone, Page, it turned out, to confirm the job was done. What Page hadn't told Brittany was that vandalism over $1,000 in Connecticut was a felony, and the custom paint job on my 3-year-old Accord pushed damages to $1,800. When police arrested both women, Brittany immediately flipped, providing text messages where Page had promised payment, given detailed instructions, and even sent photos of my car with arrows pointing to where she wanted the paint applied. From jail, Paige made her most desperate play yet, calling me collect at 11:47 p.m., sobbing with the theatrical intensity of someone who'd watched too many prison dramas. "Jake, please, I need help. The bail is $5,000 and I'm pregnant with your child. You can't leave me in here carrying your baby." I let the automated system record while I put her on speaker for Rebecca to hear. "Paige, we haven't been intimate in 8 months. You told me you were sleeping with Ethan, Ricardo from Tulum, and at least 2 other guys based on your social media." The silence stretched before she tried again. "It could be yours from before. The timing works out. Please, I'm scared and alone and our baby needs." I interrupted to mention I'd been seeing someone new, Dr. Lindsay Kaufman, a cardiovascular surgeon who owned a lakefront house and found my stability and integrity attractive, qualities Paige had called boring and unambitious. The meltdown that followed was spectacular enough that guards had to intervene, her screaming about gold-digging doctors and threatening to destroy my new relationship echoing through the jail phone system until they forcibly ended the call. During her court-mandated psychological evaluation, Dr. Martinez uncovered what he described as a persistent pattern of exploitative behavior across multiple relationships, revealing I was the 4th man in 7 years across 3 states to file fraud or harassment charges against her. She'd left Arizona after draining a pharmacy student's education fund, fled Nevada when a casino manager discovered she'd been using his credit cards for online shopping sprees, and abandoned California after a tech executive got a restraining order when she tried to blackmail him with fake pregnancy claims. The evaluation painted a picture of someone who viewed relationships purely as resource extraction opportunities, targeting men with stable incomes and trusting natures, escalating to threats and harassment when the money stopped flowing. "She's remarkably consistent," Dr. Martinez told the court. "Each relationship follows the same pattern: love bombing, financial dependence, devaluation when questioned, and scorched earth revenge when abandoned. Mr. Thompson is fortunate he discovered her nature relatively quickly." The prosecutor offered Paige a plea deal: 18 months probation, 200 hours community service, mandatory therapy, and $8,900 in restitution for legal fees, identity theft damages, and vehicle repair, or face trial on multiple felony charges that could mean serious prison time. Her public defender, who looked exhausted after just 3 meetings with her, strongly recommended she take the deal, especially after Brittany agreed to testify about the vandalism conspiracy in exchange for reduced charges. Paige took the deal while insisting to anyone who'd listen that she was the real victim, that the system was biased against female entrepreneurs, and that I'd orchestrated everything to destroy her dreams of becoming a wellness influencer, apparently forgetting that her dreams had been financed entirely by my engineering salary while her influence extended to exactly 17 Instagram followers, half of whom were probably bots she'd purchased during her brief attempt at social media stardom. 8 months later, I was reviewing structural assessments for a new hospital wing when Rebecca called with an update that perfectly captured how far Paige had fallen and how far I'd risen since that text message on the bridge. "You're not going to believe this," she said, barely containing her laughter. "Remember Paige's aerial yoga instructor friend Skylar? She just published a blog post called Toxic Friends and Financial Predators. My story that went completely viral, over 2 million views and climbing. The blog detailed how Paige had borrowed $3,000 for a wellness retreat that never happened, $1,500 for inventory she never purchased, and convinced 3 other women to invest in a yoga studio partnership that existed only in her imagination, complete with screenshots of text messages where Paige promised returns that would have made Bernie Madoff blush. The comment section became a support group for Paige's victims across multiple states, with women sharing stories of loans never repaid, business partnerships that evaporated with their investments, and elaborate sob stories about medical emergencies that funded shopping sprees instead of chemotherapy. The viral post caught the attention of a true crime podcaster who did a deep dive episode called The Wellness Grifter, which led to 3 more women from different states reaching out to me with disturbingly similar stories. Same patterns, same manipulation tactics, same financial devastation left in her wake. Paige's plea bargain had included specific terms: guilty pleas to harassment, identity theft reduced from fraud, and conspiracy to commit vandalism, resulting in 18 months probation, 200 community service hours at a food bank where she had to actually serve people instead of taking Instagram photos, mandatory weekly therapy with a counselor who specialized in personality disorders, and $8,900 in restitution paid in monthly installments from her wages. She was working 2 jobs that I knew about: morning shifts at a grocery store deli where she had to wear a hairnet that destroyed her carefully maintained image, and evening shifts at a call center selling insurance to people who invariably hung up on her, the kind of rejection she'd never experienced when spending my money. She'd been forced to move to rural Vermont, living in her aunt's basement studio apartment that was a far cry from the suburban house she'd treated like her personal estate, her social media accounts deleted after her mugshot appeared in the local news with the headline, "Local Woman Arrested in Harassment Campaign Against Ex-Boyfriend," which had been shared thousands of times by people who recognized her from various scams. Meanwhile, my relationship with Lindsay had evolved into something I hadn't thought possible after Paige, a genuine partnership where both people contributed equally, though in different ways. Lindsay found the entire saga fascinating from a psychological perspective, often pointing out behavioral patterns I'd missed while living in the chaos. The fact that she called you from jail claiming pregnancy is textbook manipulation, Lindsay had said over dinner. She went for the nuclear option when everything else failed. I see it in the ER with people trying to avoid consequences, sudden medical emergencies that disappear when they don't work. My promotion to senior structural engineer came with an $18,000 raise and the option to lead the Connecticut Bridge Rehabilitation Project, recognition for maintaining professional excellence despite what HR diplomatically called significant personal challenges. The 12 therapy sessions Rebecca had insisted I attend helped me recognize patterns, how I'd been overcompensating for Paige's lack of contribution, mistaking exploitation for need, confusing manipulation for affection. You have a builder's mindset, the therapist had explained. You see broken things and want to fix them. But some people don't want to be fixed, they want to find someone who'll accommodate their dysfunction indefinitely. Mrs. Chen had turned our rental drama into social media gold with her TikTok series, Landlord Chronicles, where she shared tenant horror stories with names changed but details intact. The Paige episode, titled, "The Yoga Girl Who Couldn't Stretch the Truth," had garnered 4.3 million views, with comments full of similar stories about entitled tenants who'd treated properties like hotels and landlords like servants. She sent me a message saying she'd already made enough from the video's ad revenue to cover the window Paige had destroyed, calling it the most profitable broken window in Connecticut history. I occasionally checked Paige's LinkedIn profile. She didn't know I could see her viewing my page monthly, where she'd reinvented herself as a life transition coach specializing in helping women navigate difficult changes and toxic relationships, with 0 clients, no certifications, and a profile photo clearly taken before her arrest because her eyes still had that predatory confidence instead of the hollow desperation that had replaced it. The irony of her coaching others through transitions when she couldn't navigate her own life without exploiting someone was profound, but perfectly matched her pattern of creating elaborate facades with no foundation underneath. 6 months after her arrest, she sent one final email through her court-appointed counselor, claiming she'd experienced tremendous growth and understood her mistakes, asking if I'd write a character reference to reduce her probation period. I forwarded it directly to Goldstein without comment, and he responded to her counselor with a single line: "Mr. Thompson declines to provide any statements regarding Ms. Winters." The silence that followed was more powerful than any words I could have written. Sometimes the most profound response to someone who treated you as disposable is to simply let them experience the disposability they'd assigned to you. Sitting in my new office overlooking Hartford's skyline, reviewing plans for structures built to last generations while Lindsay texted about dinner plans at a restaurant we'd both pay for, I realized the greatest irony of all. Paige had been right in that text from the bridge. I really wasn't enough for her, wasn't enough of a fool to keep funding her delusions, wasn't enough of a doormat to accept exploitation as love, wasn't enough of a mark to confuse manipulation with partnership. And thank God for that, because being not enough for someone like Paige meant being exactly enough for someone like Lindsay, for a life built on solid foundations instead of spiritual sand, for a future where both people contributed to the structure instead of one person carrying the entire load while the other posted about manifestation and abundance while the bills came due. The universe, it turned out, actually did provide, just not in the way Paige had expected.